The last words my father ever said to me weren't screamed in anger. They were spoken with a chilling, almost bored finality, like he was closing a business deal that had gone sour. "You are no longer a part of this family," he said, his eyes as cold as the marble floor in our foyer. "As of this moment, you are nothing to us." My mother just stood beside him, a silent, sculpted statue of disappointment. My sister, Clara, the golden child, watched the whole thing with a faint, triumphant smirk on her lips. They took my keys, my phone, and my wallet. Then they shut the door, and the deadbolt slid into place with the sound of a guillotine. In that moment, I didn't just lose my family, I was completely erased. I had no idea they would take it a step further, that 3 years later, they'd gather a crowd to mourn a death they had authored themselves. They thought they had buried me, but they really just planted a seed. Growing up in the Sterling household was like living in a museum dedicated to perfection. Our lives were curated. Every achievement was polished and put on display, and every failure was shoved in a locked cellar. My father, Richard Sterling, was a titan of finance who saw the world in terms of profit and loss. My mother, Eleanor, was the architect of our family's social standing, a woman who could run a charity gala with military precision. And then there was Clara. My older sister was their masterpiece. She was beautiful, smart, and most importantly, she did exactly what they wanted. She followed the path they laid for her without a single misstep, the right schools, the right friends, the right future. And then there was me. I was the painting that always hung slightly crooked, the one that drew your eye for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't that I was a bad kid, I just wasn't them. I loved books more than banquets and honest conversations more than schmoozing. While Clara was learning about the stock market at my father's knee, I was hiding in the library, lost in other worlds. This wasn't just a difference, it was treated like a defect. Family dinners were a performance, and I was the one who always forgot my lines. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" That question was the soundtrack to my childhood. Every A I brought home was a disgrace next to Clara's A+. I was a constant, walking, breathing disappointment. Being the family scapegoat is like a slow poison. You get this profound sense that you don't belong, that you're fundamentally unworthy of love. For years, I tried so hard to earn their approval. I forced myself into business clubs, pretended to care about their vapid social circles, and wore the clothes my mother picked out for me. I bit my tongue until it practically bled. But it was no use. The more I tried to fit in, the more I felt like an imposter in my own skin, my real self slipping away and being replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The breaking point wasn't one big explosion. It was 1,000 tiny cracks that finally shattered everything. I'd secretly nurtured this dream of studying literature, and I won a scholarship to go abroad for a year. For me, it was a lifeline. For them, it was a betrayal. It wasn't some prestigious business school, it wasn't part of the Sterling family master plan. My father called it a frivolous waste of time. My mother fretted about how it would look to her friends. Clara told me I was being selfish. I went anyway. And that year was the first time I ever felt like I could breathe. I felt like me. I discovered a passion for investigative journalism, for digging up truths hidden under layers of lies. For the first time, my curious nature wasn't a flaw, it was a strength. But when I came back, I wasn't willing to play their game anymore. I had found my voice, and they couldn't stand the sound of it. The final showdown happened when I refused to take a marketing job my father had created just to keep me under his thumb. That's when he delivered his verdict. Standing in that cold, sterile foyer, I realized they weren't just kicking me out. They were amputating a part of themselves they found ugly. They needed me gone so the illusion of their perfect family could stay intact. Those first few weeks were a blur of cold, hard reality. I had $20 in my pocket and the clothes on my back. My old world of heated floors and catered meals had just vanished. I slept on park benches, in shelters, and for one terrifying week, in an abandoned building. The shame was a physical weight on my chest. Being erased by the people who are supposed to love you, It's a kind of pain so deep it feels like a physical injury. I was a ghost haunting the edges of a city that was once my playground. My turning point wasn't some grand epiphany. It was a small act of kindness. An elderly woman named Martha, who ran a soup kitchen, saw something past the grime and despair in my eyes. She gave me a hot meal, and then she offered me a job washing dishes. The pay was terrible, and the work was grueling, but it was a start. It was an anchor. Martha never asked about my past, she just saw a kid who needed a chance. And in that small, steamy kitchen, I started to rebuild my life. I saved every dollar. I moved into a tiny room in a shared apartment, and the anonymity was a relief. Nobody knew the name Sterling. Nobody expected anything from me. I was just a girl trying to get by. During the day, I washed dishes. At night, I went to the public library and used their computers. That dream of being an investigative journalist hadn't died. Now, I was obsessed with the mechanics of power and deceit I had seen firsthand. I enrolled in online courses for forensic accounting. I know, it's a weird choice for a literature major, but it felt right. My father's world was built on numbers, on ledgers, and balance sheets. I decided I would learn his language, not to join his world, but to understand how to tear it apart. For 3 years, that was my life: work, study, sleep. I was building a new life from the ashes, brick by painful brick, turning my pain into power. Then, about 2.5 years in, a morbid curiosity led me to search my family's name online. I was expecting to see pictures from some charity ball. What I found was my own obituary. It was short and tasteful, right in the local paper. It mentioned a tragic accident and my untimely passing. They had officially declared me dead. How is that even possible? Normally you have to be missing for years, but I guess with their money and influence, they found a way to rush it. They claimed they'd done a diligent search for me, which was a complete lie. They didn't just erase me from their lives, they erased me from existence. The rage that hit me was cold and sharp. This wasn't about grief anymore. This was a calculated, cruel act. They probably wanted to collect on a life insurance policy and cement their story of the perfect, grieving family. It was right then that my plan started to form. This was no longer about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the one thing they stole from me: my life. My new accounting skills were razor sharp. I started digging into Sterling Financial. It didn't take long to find the cracks. My father and my sister, who was now a vice president, were running a sophisticated scheme, using shell corporations and fake invoices to siphon millions from their own company. They were funding their lavish lifestyles by stealing from investors and committing massive tax fraud. I spent the next 6 months gathering proof: bank records, forged documents, a trail of emails that laid their crimes bare. I put it all together into a neat little portfolio of their downfall. And then, I saw it, the announcement for my own memorial service. A celebration of a life cut tragically short. The hypocrisy was just breathtaking. They were going to stand in front of everyone and mourn the daughter they'd thrown away. They had just given me the perfect stage for my comeback. This wasn't going to be their moment of closure. It was going to be their day of reckoning. The day of my funeral was, ironically, beautiful. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows of the enormous chapel my parents had chosen. It was a cathedral to their own self-importance. I didn't dress for a funeral. I wore a tailored power suit in a deep crimson that stood out like a drop of blood against all the somber black and gray outfits. I was not a ghost. I was a resurrection. I waited outside, listening to the muffled organ music, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about truth. Then I heard my father's voice, thick with fake emotion, as he began the eulogy. My daughter. He started, his voice cracking right on cue. She was a free spirit. Full of life. Her loss has left a hole in our hearts that can never be filled. That was my cue. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. They groaned as they swung inward, and the entire chapel fell silent. Every single head turned. The organist's fingers fumbled on the keys, creating a single, ugly, dying chord. A collective gasp went through the room. At the front, my father froze, his mouth hanging open. The color drained from his face until it was ashen. My mother's hand flew to her pearls, her eyes wide with a terror that was, for the first time, completely genuine. And Clara? Clara looked like she had just seen a ghost, her perfect composure shattering to reveal the raw fear underneath. I walked down the aisle, my heels clicking deliberately on the stone floor. The sound was deafening. People I'd known my whole life stared at me like I was some kind of monster. I ignored them. My eyes were locked on the three people standing next to my empty coffin. I stopped a few feet from the altar and let the silence hang in the air, thick and suffocating. Then I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp. "You're right, Father," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing through the chapel. "A hole was left. But not in your hearts. In your balance sheets." I saw a flash of understanding, and pure panic, in his eyes. "I'm sorry to interrupt this performance," I continued, looking out at the crowd. "But I think you all deserve to know what you're really mourning today. It's not me. It's the end of the Sterling Empire." I held up a thick manila envelope. For 3 years, I was dead to them. And in that time, I learned a new language. Not literature, Father. Forensic accounting. And it turns out, your books tell a much more interesting story than any of my old novels. I walked to the front pew where my father's lawyer and his biggest business partner were sitting, and I handed each of them a copy of the portfolio I'd built. "In there," I said, my voice ringing with authority, "is all the proof of embezzlement, shell corporations, and a multi-million-dollar tax fraud scheme run by Richard and Clara Sterling. It seems they declared me dead to hide a much bigger corpse, the rotting integrity of their company." The chapel erupted into chaos. Whispers turned to frantic murmurs. Phones came out. My father lunged toward me, his face turning a shade of purple. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed. "Oh, I do," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I'm reclaiming my life. And I'm ending yours." I smiled again, wider this time. "The real funeral is about to begin." This was my story of betrayal, but it became my story of survival. If you believe that you can fight back and write your own ending, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because you won't want to miss what comes next. As security, alerted by an anonymous tip I'd made myself, entered the chapel, I turned my back on the chaos. I didn't need to watch my father collapse or see my mother's vacant stare. I didn't need to see Clara's tear-streaked face as she realized her perfect life was over. I had already won. I walked out of those heavy doors and into the bright sunlight, not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally, completely, claimed her freedom. The fallout for them was immediate and catastrophic. With my neat little package of evidence, the authorities launched a full-scale investigation. The company's assets were frozen. My father and sister were arrested before the week was even over. Their names, once a symbol of prestige, were now splashed across headlines detailing their greed and deception. They lost everything: the company, the house, their social status, and their freedom. I never spoke to them again. I didn't need to. The best revenge wasn't watching them get punished, it was my own liberation. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and didn't just survive, I thrived. I built a new life, a new identity, and a kind of strength they could never touch. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And my life, the one I chose for myself, was just beginning to bloom.